Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you all for joining me at this time. My name is Shafi Zain, and I'm coming on to bring a message for the chosen. If you find that this resonates with you in any way, please be sure to like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and let us know how this resonates with your circumstance. And definitely add in whatever facts or opinions that you have about this message. So, this message is called the King James Version Bible is the original Willie Lynch letter. Now, some of you may know the King James Version Bible was written in 1611. And the King James Version Bible is known as one of the original texts, the original translations, right? And King James was supposed to have given the order or the permission for others to come together to pretty much write this text or to translate the biblical text. Now, the reason why I say the King James Version Bible is the original Willie Lynch letter, because when we read the Willie Lynch letter, I don't know if any of you out there have ever read this particular letter, but the Willie Lynch letter is called The Making of the Slave. Now, this letter was written in 1712. I'm going to read the first portion of it to you all, for those of you who are not familiar. So, this speech was delivered by Willie Lynch on the bank of the James River in the colony of Virginia in 1712. So, this would be about 100 years after the King James Version Bible was distributed to the masses. 1712 in Virginia, on the bank of the James River. Now, the James River, keep that name in mind, okay? So, Lynch was a British slave owner in the West Indies. He was invited to the colony of Virginia in 1712 to teach his methods to the slave owners there. The term lynching is derived from his last name. So let's begin the letter. So it says, "Greetings, gentlemen. I greet you here on the bank of the James River in the year of our Lord." Now, the year of our Lord was commonly used to refer to any time after the birth of Jesus. Okay, so this is Willie Lynch saying, "Greetings. I greet you here on the bank of James River in the year of our Lord, 1712. First, I shall thank you, the gentlemen of the colony in Virginia, for bringing me here. I am here to help you solve some of your problems with the slaves. Your invitation reached me on my modest plantation in the West Indies, where I have experimented with some of the newest and still the oldest methods of control of slaves. Ancient Rome would envy us if my program is implemented." Now, this is interesting because he said ancient Rome would envy us. So then you might want to ask, well, why would Rome envy the strategy that Willie Lynch is getting ready to introduce to those who colonized Virginia? Why would Rome envy them? Well, let's move forward. If my program is implemented, as our boat sailed on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. Now, we got to back up right here. This is very, very important, because he said that ancient Rome would envy his method that he's getting ready to present to these settlers, these colonizers in Virginia, right? If his program is implemented. So he's saying that as his boat sailed the James River, this James River is named after he called him our illustrious king. So he's talking about King James. And he goes on to say whose version of the Bible we cherish. So we know he's talking about King James, who made a large contribution to the translation of the 1611 King James Version. Okay? So he's paying homage to King James and saying that they cherish the Bible that King James wrote. Now, this is a slave, this is a kidnapper. I call them kidnappers because that's what they are, a murderer, a criminal that they called a slave master. This is Willie Lynch speaking here. And so he's giving reference to King James, saying that that is our illustrious king. So this would be in 1712. King James would have died around 1625. So this would be approximately almost a century after the death of King James. This river was named after King James, and also the area called Jamestown in Virginia is named after King James because in 1607, this was during the time where King James was still alive, 104 Englishmen and boys arrived in North America to start a settlement, and they called that town Jamestown, Virginia. So James will be named after King James, okay? Now, King James had had a hand in the colonization of America. It said the Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company chartered by King James in 1606 to establish a colony in North America. So King James actually had a hand in, funding and supporting the colonization of America. So that's when in 1607, the 104 Englishmen arrived in America. Now, this is interesting. This part of the letter is very interesting because, again, Willie Lynch he pays homage to King James, but he also says that they would envy him. They would envy his tactics on breaking a slave, breaking down the melanated man, woman, and child. They would envy his tactics, okay? If they compare. So obviously there's a comparison of how they did it in Rome when King James was in position versus how Willie Lynch had discovered it would be implemented from that point moving forward. So let's keep reading the letter here. I'm not going to read too much, but there's some points here. These are very important points to keep in mind as I go over this message with you all today. So it says here, while Rome, hold on, let me go back a little bit. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish, I saw enough to know that your problem is not unique. While Rome used cords of wood as crosses for standing human bodies along its highways in great numbers, you are here using the tree and the rope on occasions. So he's acknowledging that in Rome, they would use cords of wood to stand human bodies on, pretty much to murder people, to so-called, to sacrifice people. They would use cords of wood. And he was comparing how they did it in America, where they was hanging, using ropes and hanging on a tree. Now, the cross is very interesting because the origin of this word is crux. The cross is also known as a stake. If you all ever heard how they would burn witches on a stake, right? And so the stake is literally a long piece of wood where they've, it's a tree, but they've carved off the limbs, and it's now just one large, huge piece of wood that they would use to tie people up on and burn them to death or do whatever they was going to do in order to pretty much kill them, to murder them, right? But the meaning of the cross is it also means trouble or misery. Now keep that in mind. The cross also means trouble or misery. So when you wear a cross, And a lot of you say, well, I only wear the cross. I don't wear a cross with a dead depiction of Jesus on it. I only wear the cross. Then consider you're not wearing the cross. The cross is wearing you. So you don't need a picture of a dead Jesus on there because you are the person that is on the cross when you wear a cross. Consider it is a symbol of death, a symbol of trouble or misery. That's what cross means. So when you attract all of this negative energy to you, consider what you're doing when you wear a cross. These people understood the symbols. They understood the symbolism and the meanings of things. So let me see what else I want to read from here, because I'm not going to read the whole letter. I caught a whiff of a dead slave hanging from a tree a couple of miles back. You are not only losing valuable stock by hangings, you are having uprisings. Slaves are running away. Your crops are sometimes left in fields too long for maximum profit. You suffer occasional fires. Your animals are killed. Gentlemen, you know what your problems are. I do not need to elaborate. So he goes on to say how he has a foolproof method of controlling slaves to last for between 300 to maybe even 1,000 years. Okay. And so the letter, you can always pull up the letter to gain an understanding of the point here. But what I'm focused on is the beginning of the letter, because these are very vital things that was called out here. Another thing that we need to understand is that it's documented that slavery began in 1619 in America. However, it's also documented that in 1492, this would have been around the time that old Christopher Columbus stinking ass would have stumbled onto America, okay? Because he damn sure he didn't discover America, okay? Christopher Columbus, this is the time that it was documented that there was at least 112 million Native Americans here on this soil. Now, keep in mind, this was 1492, but it says that slavery would have begun around 1619. So if there was 112 million Native Americans, as they call them, here on this land, original people of America, that's a lot of people, right? But yet and still, you would go and kill, because they say that by 1650, there was less than 5 million left on the soil. So when you came in 1492, there was 112 million approximately. But by 1650, they're saying that there was 5 million. The math ain't mathing right about now, largely because if you have 112 million people that you can literally kill, if there was only 5 million left, that means that they killed approximately, let's say, 106 million. If you can kill 106 million people in the middle of slavery, in the middle of the time of enslavement, then why would it be beneficial to travel 6 to 8 weeks back and forth from America to Africa to get slaves, and then to travel another 6 to 8 weeks to come from Africa to America? You're talking about a good 12, 16 weeks of traveling back and forth over and over and over again to get slaves from Africa, to kidnap melanated people from Africa to bring them to America. What would be the point in doing that if there was already 112 million Native Americans in America at that time? Because if you can kill them, then you can most certainly enslave them. So it doesn't make any sense that these people claim that they killed off over 100 million people, but only kept 5 million, and then decided to go through the labor of traveling dangerous travels from one end of the earth to the other to go and get slaves and bring them back, over and over and over again. And you risk dying, you risk drowning, you risk storms, you risk losing people, melanated people that are dying from one trip to the next. You mean to tell me something? The math is not mathing. If you can kill 100 million, then you can enslave 100 million. So why wouldn't they just enslave the Native Americans? Are y'all following me? It's very clear that the melanated men, women, and children that were enslaved, we were already here. Because if they could go through all of this trouble to come up with plans that would keep their system going for 300 to up to 1,000 years, then I know they had enough common sense to know that if you're going to enslave, then why not enslave the people that's already here? Because really, they didn't care. Technically, it wouldn't be about, okay, is their hair woolly enough? Because they want you to think that the native Indians had straight hair, right? Everybody had straight hair. They had whiter skin. That's what they want you to believe the native Indians looked like. But it wouldn't matter what they looked like, because technically, these people just wanted bodies to do their labor for them and to help build their empire. So if all you wanted was bodies, then why didn't you use the same people who was here when you came to America and just enslave them rather than killing 1 million of them? I mean, 100 million, my bad, 100 million, and then going back and forth from one end of the earth to another, risking your entire life for 12 to 18 weeks, going back and forth to get melanated beings from another country. It just doesn't make sense. So this is where we're seeing that these people already, they knew who we were, right? They already know who we are. They still know who we are. We was here already. And they have a whole lot of contradictions here. But the King James Bible is what Willie Lynch referenced. They named the land after King James, Jamestown, the first settlement, okay, to start the first settlement in America, the first permanent settlement in America. These colonizers named it after their illustrious king, King James, who also created this joint stock company. It was chartered by King James in 1606. So King James already had his hand in wanting to colonize people. He already had his bid in it. He put his money on it. He sent his people over to do it. And so for Willie Lynch to say that King James and those people of Rome would envy his method of control, that says a lot. And so it makes you start to look at the biblical text from a much more clear lens now. When you get rid of the illusion and the conditioning and start to look at it from a higher perspective, you will realize that the biblical text written by King James is literally a text to prepare or to break down the mind of the melanated man, woman, and child, to curse the melanated man, woman, and child, and that the birth of this fictional character by the name of Jesus would be the beginning of their rule. It would be the beginning of sacrifices that would be made openly, putting people on the stake, putting people on what they called so-called crosses, hanging men, hanging women, hanging children. These would all be the sacrifices that these people would go on to do in order to break the mind of the melanated man, woman, and child, to take us away from our strength and power, to incite fear. Because consider Willie Lynch, that's all his letter was about. It was about creating trust issues, division, and fear within the melanated man, woman, and child. And when you look into the biblical text, that's all the biblical text is about. It's about creating fear, division, and disempowerment of the melanated man, woman, and child through many, many curses. And so when you put it all together, this is why he says, whose version of the Bible we cherish, because they would go on to use the King James Version Bible as a method of control as well. Keeping in mind that King James was directly connected to the establishment of the first permanent settlement in America by these colonizers. He was directly connected to it, okay? The Virginia Company of London was a joint stock company chartered by King James in 1606 to establish a colony in North America. And then in 1607, 104 Englishmen and boys would then go on to arrive in North America to start the first permanent settlement in a place called Jamestown, Virginia. Jamestown being named after King James, who wrote the Bible. And this is why Willie Lynch addressed him. It was one of the first things that he would mention there in Jamestown, Virginia. As our boat sailed south on the James River, named for our illustrious king, whose version of the Bible we cherish. This is how he began his address to the colonizers here in America. And so it's very important that we put all of the pieces of the puzzle together. We all play a vital role in gathering this information. You know, you have a piece to the puzzle. I have a piece to the puzzle. We're putting all of this stuff together because it's all starting to make sense. And it really didn't take a whole lot of research. What it really takes, it doesn't take a wealth of book knowledge. What it takes is open eyes and willingness to discern and to see things past the illusion, past what you were taught. That's all it takes. Because it makes no sense that when you come here in America and you guesstimate that there's 112 million Native Americans on the land. You would go on to kill over 100 million just to turn around and travel back and forth across the globe over and over again to pick up other melanated men, women, and children from a whole nother country to bring them here when you already clearly have control over the ones who are here on American soil, right? They clearly already had control over the Native Americans. If you could kill 90% of the population, then you could most certainly enslave 90% of the population. And if you couldn't enslave 90%, then by the time you get done killing off even 5%, even 10%, even 20%, you would at least have 80% left to enslave, because by that time, they are now fearful of you, right? You have now broken the slave. You have now prepared the mind of the slave. You have now been very successful at the making of a slave, based on the title of the Willie Lynch letter. So why would they go through all of those troubles to kill 90% of those who was already on the land just to go to a whole nother land across the globe and bring them over here? Is that really what they did? Or did they lie so that we would not know that we are the indigenous people of this land and that we have clear rights to it, the melanated man, woman, and child here in America? We have clear rights to this land because we was here first. And so if we knew that without a shadow of a doubt, then we would be able to look them square in their eyes and say, you are foreigners to this land, and therefore you have no jurisdiction over it. You have no right creating a law on this land because you are not from this land. You are an alien. Go back to your country. You have no right telling us how to move, how to live, anything concerning law. You have no right even speaking on it because you yourself are an alien to the land. And so at that point, if they allow the truth to come out, then all hell will break loose. Because that means that you need to go ahead and get up out the White House. Every position, judges, lawyers, attorneys, you hold no position. All of that is just costumes. It's just one big play. It's a big stage play is what it is. A bunch of criminals who got together and came up with a plan to make the original people of the land believe that they were in fact foreigners of the land. That way, even you would be able to say, okay, well, I don't have any rights to establish the treaty and things like that was established back then. I don't have any rights to those things because technically I'm not from America. Technically, I came over here on a boat. But these people are very strategic. And there's no way that they would have killed off 100 million people instead of enslaving them. If you got that much power and control, then, okay, you might have to kill off a good amount because we ain't going down easy. By no means was they going to be able to take us down easily. So no, they would not have been able to enslave 90%, maybe not 80%, maybe not 70%. Let's just say they couldn't even enslave 50%. If they couldn't enslave 50%, then you still have a good 60 million people left on the land. 60 million people that you can enslave. But you mean to tell me that they would turn around and kill, based on what they have documented, 95% of those who was already here just to turn around and go through the trouble of traveling back and forth from one side of the globe to the other to get to bring more melanated people from Africa. Does that even make any sense? Can somebody help me to understand? Does that make any sense to you? Because it makes no sense to me. But what does make sense is that the King James Version would be the original Willie Lynch letter, because it would consist of many different texts that would go on to curse you and your lineage, melanated man, woman, and child. It will go on to curse you. It will go on to show the sacrifices necessary in order for them to receive redemption for their sins, right? And so sacrifice of the melanated man, woman, and child has been largely used throughout the biblical text, and they will go on to continue to use it through these burning at the stakes, because Willie Lynch will go on in this letter to talk about how, to break the melanated man, those who are strong-willed and that's connected to their nature, their origin, in order to break the melanated man, woman, and child, you take the strongest of all of them and you would tie him to two horses, one side of his body to one horse, the other side of his body to the other horse, and you would beat the horses and make them run in two opposite directions until you rip the body open of that person and kill them in front of the other melanated men, women, and children. That way they would now know, okay, the strongest of us has now been defeated, and so now we must obey. But then they give reference to the King James Bible, because they would also use that biblical text to further indoctrinate and brainwash the melanated man, woman, and child through this false religion, to take you further away from your origin and to give you this illusion that you are to worship a European God. And if you are worshiping a European God, then quite naturally, when you have a European criminal who is enslaving you, then you will be in your mind thinking that what they're doing is righteous because it's in their Bible that they beat into you. It's in the King James Bible. When King James was directly connected to helping to establish the colonization of America, the first permanent settlement in America was directly connected to King James in 1606. This man was still alive. He died in 1625. He wrote the biblical text. He had his hand in writing the King James Version biblical text in 1611. And all of this is happening right before 1619, when slavery is documented to have begun in America. So it just shows you that this was all a combination of texts, plans, agendas, conspiracies, like they sat down at the round table and they had this entire thing all figured out. It was all figured out. Willie Lynch would come along 100 years later, approximately 100 years later, after the first settlement connected to King James and these 104 men in 1607. Willie Lynch would come in 1712 to say, hey, I see that there's some things that's just not working out as well as y'all thought it was going to work out. So let me help you. Because if we implement this, they're going to be envious. Those people in Rome and King James and them, they would be envious if they knew the plan that I have to present to you today. And they have carried out this plan. If you read this letter, they have carried it out to a T and continue to perpetuate this energy today. Today, right now. What's even more interesting in this letter is that it will go on to say that in order to further cause division between the melanated man, woman, and child, you want to, they said, to give them a drop of their pure white blood. That's what Willie Lynch said. Give them a drop of the pure white blood, pretty much to water down the DNA of the melanated man, woman, and child, so that when they breeded us, because they called us animals, when they breeded us, then we would no longer have that original DNA. So that way it would take you further and further away from your origin. So in other words, they would rape the woman, get her pregnant so that she would keep giving birth to more light-skinned babies that had European blood in them, because the whole objective was that when they get ready to breed that biracial child with a melanated man or woman, at that point, they would be more easily controlled, because they are further and further away from their natural state, their natural DNA, because it's been watered down that much through the rape. So that was also a part of the plan. And now today, the way that they continue to push this narrative is through pushing out in media, social media, promoting this whole thing between melanated men being in a space of status if they're dating a European woman. So now they continue to do the mind play. They still continue with the psychological mind play, but they're doing it from a different angle now, by saying that if you marry one of them, then that gives you status. That means that you've made it. That means that you are, of the upper class, So when Willie Lynch said that this thing was going to last no less than 300 years, potentially up to 1,000, he was not lying. And these people continue to utilize this strategy today. So there's much more, but I'm going to stop here. I will go on to say that we need to do a declaration together. This is what you're going to write on paper and burn, because we have to destroy the curse of this Willie Lynch letter and any system or agendas that have been created based on the Willie Lynch letter as well as the King James Bible. So this letter, for those spiritual warriors out there, you're going to write on paper, I declare and decree all curses, agendas, and systems created through the energy of the King James Bible and the Willie Lynch letter are swiftly destroyed now and forever, in spirit and in flesh, across all timelines, realms, and dimensions. So I'm going to read that again. You're going to write this on paper and burn it. Give thanks to the Most High and your spiritual team for helping you to destroy this energy. I declare and decree all curses, agendas, and systems created through the energy of the King James Bible and Willie Lynch letter are swiftly destroyed now and forever, in spirit and in flesh, across all timelines, realms, and dimensions. Okay? We got to come together to do this, because the more that we ask, the more answers we receive, the more this thing starts to make sense. And this is not new. Many of you are like, this is not new. We already knew that we was from this land. We already knew that, they didn't travel back and forth. But the way that all of this is intertwined with the King James Bible is what a lot of people did not understand or foresee, because so many people truly believe that text was inspired by God, but what it was inspired by was a man who called himself a God. You'll say it was inspired by the Lord, but what it was inspired by was a man who called himself Lord. These are people who will call themselves gods and lords because of their position of ranking, their position of authority over the masses. And so King James is no different than Willie Lynch. He understood that in order to break someone down, you have to indoctrinate them. You have to place curses over them. That's why the biblical text is full of so many curses. And once they would introduce this to the melanated man, woman, and child, they would make you believe that your punishment was valid. Your punishment was worthy because it came from the Most High God. That's what they would make you believe, because they understood that we are very spiritually inclined people. And so when you break the original understanding away from a person and torture them into fear from believing the truth and feed them lies, a person who is highly spiritual and has a connection to the Most High is going to seek the Most High out, even in the midst of illusion. You're going to try to find the Most High in there somewhere. And so this is why we accepted the European Jesus as being our God for so long, and would pray to that image, would cry out to that image, right? Even later on would start putting up photos in the house of that image. Many people's grandmas and grand aunts had pictures of white Jesus all over the dang on house. You would go on to teach this to your children. You would be wearing crosses or putting crosses up in your home, thinking that it meant something righteous, thinking that it meant that you are redeemed, right? When in fact, the cross is, even in biblical text, it tells you that if a man is hung on a cross, that he is cursed. This is in Galatians, I believe it's Galatians 3 and 13. If a man is hung on a cross, he's cursed. Now, this is in the New Testament where it was saying this, but I believe I think it mentioned that twice in the New Testament. If someone is hung on a tree, he is cursed. And biblical text also says that Christ would have been hung on a tree. So all of this represents a cursed energy. All of this represents rituals and spell work that will be casted over the masses, specifically the melanated man, woman, and child, because this was all about taking over, gaining power, and maintaining that power, but also stripping the original man, woman, and child from our spiritual understanding, because they understood who we are. They still know who we are. Their biggest agenda, their greatest agenda, is to keep us from finding out who we are. And so they continue. So this is some very important information. I strongly suggest that you like, subscribe, share this with someone else who is hungry and thirsty for knowledge and understanding. I hope that this message brought you some clarity for those of you who might have had questions and didn't understand it from this perspective. I love you all, and I'll talk to you all next time.